We have the perfect little summer headband project today. We're going to put a bow on it. Beautiful, right? And you can even make the pattern smaller so that it fits the special little gal in your life. So let's get started. All right, so for our last headband, we used a single piece of fabric that was 20 and a quarter by 8 inches deep. But for this project, our headband has 3 pieces. So it has the body of the headband, and the circumference of my head is 22 and a half inches, which is the average lady's head circumference. So my headband pattern piece for the body is going to be 90% of my head circumference, and that works out to 20 inches and a quarter. So 20 and a quarter, and then 6 inches deep. All right, and our bow is going to be a square 6 by 6. You can adjust the size of the bow. Once you've got the hang of this, you can make this pattern your own, and you can make your bow come off the edges of the headband. I decided that I would just leave it so that the bow didn't go any wider than the width of the headband. And then the centerpiece, 5 inches deep by 2 and a quarter inches wide. And again, you can determine how wide you want that centerpiece of the bow to be. So 3 pieces, 6 by 6, 5 by 2 and a quarter, and 20 and a quarter by 6 inches. I've already drawn my pattern on with my washable marker. So I'm going to cut this out and then we'll get started. All right, now we're moving over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew the back seam of the headband. Got my handy little magnet seam guide, which helps me sew a straight seam. Thank you, little magnet. And I'm just using a clip instead of pinning it, but you do whatever is comfortable for you. And I'm just doing a straight stitch. And I'll take out my clip. Reverse or back tack. All right, so now I'm going to sew this seam flat, which is really nice when it's against your head. You don't want a bulky seam when you're wearing a headband. So this seam is going to get sewn flat on either side of the center, and it'll look like a decorative top stitch too. Take off the magnet. And I'm just going to use my presser foot to determine the width of that top stitch on each side. Sew it off the edge, turn around, and come back on the other side of the center of that seam. Alrighty. Now for step 2. So here's what our headband looks like now. We have a tube. We have a flat seam that's back stitched. And it looks like a nice top stitching on the right side. So we're going to place that down on this little table. And we're going to envelope the headband inside by closing the back seam, right sides together, and just pulling out the headband as we go along sewing. We're going to leave a little opening here, and that's where we'll pull the right side out. So I usually sew in between pins, so I'm just going to pin this closed, and then I just sew around this long seam from one pin to the other. And if you have a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine, now's the time to switch to the zigzag stitch. I'll put my magnet back just so I can Try to keep that seam fairly consistent. And you see I'm pulling out the headband as I go along. So I'm going to continue just to work on sewing these right sides together and make sure that I don't sew over top of this piece that's hidden inside. Just make sure that the pins don't get caught on anything. All right, and now we're at the point where I'm going to just do a back stitch. All right, now comes the fun part. So it's like a little secret pocket here that we have, and we get to pull a beautiful little summer headband out of that pocket. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach inside and grab that piece that we had tucked away and that we were careful not to sew over while we were sewing those two edges together. And voila! The doggies, aren't they cute? So we can sew this little opening closed with a needle and a thread, or we can use our sewing machine, like to tuck in a little label when I sew that seam flat. All right, so I'm going to switch just to the regular straight seam again. I'll just move my sewing machine over, back over to the straight stitch. And so I've put my measure back on my magnetic guide. I've set it at 3/8 of an inch. And I'm just going to sew up and down this. Now this is longer than we need. I'm going to cut some off. And here, I didn't mention that I marked the center of the bow because we, like the headband, we have to turn the right side out. So I'm going to leave a little opening on either side of that little notch that I cut. We'll do the other side. All right, now I'm ready to turn my bow right side out. All right, so now all the pieces are turned right side out and we're ready to put them together. So I'm going to work on the bow first, and I want to gather the center of the bow. So I've stuck a pin there just by folding the bow in half, just to tell me roughly where the center is. And I'm going to now, with my hands, just slowly gather it. So up, up, usually 4 ridges does it. All right, so you've got 2 folds in between the 2 edges of the bow, and each edge of the bow is folded up. All right, so roughly sort of eyeball it and see where the middle is, and I'm just going to sew right through the middle of all 4 layers. Actually, it's 8 layers because the bow is a double piece. Trim the ends, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to sew it flat. And I love this headband because all of the bulk is on the outside of the head. You can turn around and go back. There's nothing on the inside next to your skin except just the plain fabric. The seams are flat, so that's not irritating. For people who buy my headbands, they can cut off my tag if they find that irritating. So we don't need all of this length. I could have told you to cut a smaller piece, but if you actually went up to the 6 inches, the same height as the bow, then you could get 2 of them if you want to cut out 2 at a time. So let's find out where we want the doggy. And we're going to have the inside together, the right sides together, and we're just going to sew this closed. I'm going to actually start it in the middle. There we go. And I like to lift up the foot and turn this way for things like this. All right. That should do it. We'll trim off anything extra and then sort of trim just above the seam in the corners. Okay, so we're going to feed the little centerpiece into the bow. Hello, little doggies. This is going to be super cute. Now at this point, you could hand stitch at the back to hold that centerpiece in place. And now we're going to place the bow on the band. I can see where the center back is because I put my label there. So I always like my trim to be just a little off center. I don't like things like bang right in the center of your head. I think it adds more interest when it's a little off center, just like all of us are, right? Now I'm going to pin this bow in place, coming about 1/2 inch away from the edge of the bow, and I'm just pinning through the one layer of the band. And I'll do the same on the other side. Looks good so far. All right, now I'm going to sort of smoosh this seam down. The edge of the bow has a seam, so I'm going to sort of flatten it. And what I want to do is just feel that single back layer and pull the front layer away so that I have a little area now that I can sew very close to that edge and catch the back part of the bow and sew it to the band. And I'll show you what I mean. All right, now comes the tricky part, or the fun part, of sewing the bow onto the band. But to have it puffy at the top of the bow or at the front of the bow, so it gives a little bit more dimension to it. You can do a hand sewing if you'd like. Just catch the back of the bow and sew into the band. You know, just like go in here, catch this, and sew it on that way. Right? You get the drift all the way to the edge, and then you wouldn't see that seam on the front. The front would still be loose and puffy and very bow-like. But being somebody who makes these as part of my business, I use my sewing machine when I can. So what I do is I flatten this seam. There's the edge of the bow seam, and I'm going to make sure that I don't have any of the front of the bow caught there. So I can feel it's just the back of the bow and the headband. And I'm going to sew the back of the bow onto the headband with my sewing machine. And you can decide how far you want to come down. Don't come right down to the edge. Do a little back tack. Trim those threads. And now when we take out that pin, that seam is hidden. The bow is puffy and pretty. At least I think so. So I'm just going to move this a bit down. Alrighty, and so here we go again. We're going to flatten that seam. And voila, the perfect summer headband. This one, especially if you're a puppy lover. All right, now you know how to make a super cute headband for summer. Lots of different fabrics out there. These are all from Spoonflower, and it's the modern jersey knit, modern jersey knit fabric that I use. And it has a good elasticity, but it has good memory. It doesn't stretch out of shape. So I highly recommend using the modern jersey knit from Spoonflower. And you can go through their catalogs of thousands of different artists that do these patterns and prints and get and earn money by selling their skill at designing fabric designs that you don't see in stores other than at Spoonflower. Anyway, we will explore some more variations of the headband pattern with our next chat and our next lesson. For the children's band, this one's for my granddaughter. You don't want to make it as deep as this. So for a little face that's under a year old, I would suggest that your pattern piece only be about 4 inches high by maybe 16 at the most. But again, if you can measure the head, that would be great, and then multiply it by 90%. For the 5-year-old set, you're looking at maybe an 18-inch wide pattern piece, and you can go up to 5 inches deep so that the finished band is going to be a little bit wider than this. Now for this band, I made the bow the same size as the bow on the adult version of the headband, but I'm going to try it on my little sweetie and see how she looks. It might be that the kids version that I'm going to show you how to make with our next video will have a smaller bow as well. Kids hate to have things in their eyes, so that's a tip. If you're going to try a hat on a child, never pull it down because they're just going to rip it off. So as long as they can see, so turn up the front of the brim with the headband. Maybe these little points will be irritating. So anyway, we will talk about this again and have a great time sewing these summer headbands. If you have any comments or questions, just leave them below and I will answer all your comments and questions. Happy sewing and see you soon, and like and subscribe to this channel, please, so we can stay in touch. Thank you. Bye.